Chapters 5 and 6 of the Book of Life by Upton Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5, Nature and Man, attempts to show how man has taken control of nature and is carrying on her processes and improving upon them. If the argument of the preceding chapter is sound, human morality is not a fixed and eternal set of laws, but is, like everything else in the world, a product of natural evolution. We can trace the history of it, just as we trace the story of the rocks. It is not a mysterious or supernatural thing. It is simply the reaction of man to his environment, and more especially to his fellow man. The source of it is that same inner impulse, that love of life, that joy in growing, that faith which appears to be the soul of all being. Man is a part of nature and a product of nature. In many fundamental respects, his ways are still nature's ways, and his laws still nature's laws. But there are other and even more significant ways in which man has separated himself from nature and made himself something quite different. In order to reveal this clearly, we draw a distinction between nature and man. This is a proper thing to do, provided we bear in mind that our classification is not permanent or final. We distinguish frogs from tadpoles, in spite of the fact that at one stage the creature is half tadpole and half frog. We distinguish the animal from the vegetable kingdom, despite the fact that in their lower forms they cannot be distinguished. What precisely is the difference between nature and man? The difference lies in the fact that nature is apparently blind in her processes. She produces 1,000,000 eggs in order to give life to one salmon. She produces countless millions of salmon to be devoured by other fish, apparently no better than salmon. Poets may take up the doctrine of evolution and dress it out in theological garments, talking about the one far-off divine event towards which the whole creation moves. But for all we can see, nature, apart from man, is just as well satisfied to move in circles, and to come back exactly where she started. Nature made a whole world of complicated creatures in the steamy, lukewarm swamps of the Mesozoic era, and then, as if deciding that the pattern of a large body and a small brain was not a success, she froze them all to death with a glacial epoch, and we have nothing but the bones to tell us about them. No one understands anything about evolution until he has realized that the phrase "the survival of the fittest" does not mean the survival of the best from any human point of view. It merely means the survival of those capable of surviving in some particular environment. We consider our present civilization as fit. But if astronomical changes should cause another ice age, we should discover that our fitness depended upon our ability to live on lichens, or on something we could grow by artificial light in the bowels of the earth. So much for our ancient mother, nature. But now, whether we say with the theologians that it was divine providence, or with the materialist philosophers that it was an accidental mixing of atoms, at any rate, it has come about that nature has recently produced creatures who are conscious of her process, who are able to observe and criticize it, to take up her work and carry it on in their own way, for better or for worse. Whether by accident or design, there has been on parts of our planet such a combination of climate and soil as has brought into being a new product of nature, a heightened form of life, which we call intelligence. Creation opens its eyes and beholds the work of the Creator, and decides that it is good, yet not so good as it might be. Creation takes up the work of the Creator and continues it, in many respects annulling it, in other respects revising it entirely. Whether a sonnet is a better or higher product than a spider is a question it would be futile to discuss, but this at least should be clear. Nature has produced an infinity of spiders, but nature never produced a sonnet, nor anything resembling it. Man, the creature of God, takes over the functions of God. This fact may shock us, or it may inspire us. To the metaphysically minded, it offers a great variety of fascinating problems. Can it be that God is in the process of becoming? That there is no God until he has become in us and through us? H.G. Wells sets forth this curious idea, and then, of course, the bishops and the clergy rise up in indignation and denounce Mr. Wells as an upstart and a trespasser upon their field. They have been worshiping their God for some 3,000 or 4,000 years, and know that he has been from eternity. He created the world at his will, and how shall impious man presume to rise up and criticize his product, and imagine that he can improve upon it? Man, with his cheap and silly little toys, his sonnets and scientific systems, his symphony concerts, and such pale imitations of the celestial harmonies. Mr. Wells, in his character of God in the making, has created a bishop of his own, and no doubt would maintain the thesis that he is a far better bishop than any created by the God of the Anglican churches. We will leave Mr. Wells' bishop to argue these problems with God's bishops, and will merely remind the reader of our warning about these metaphysical matters. You can prove anything and everything, whichever and however, all or both, and discussions of the subject are merely your enunciation of the fact that you have your private truth as you want it. It may be that there is an infinite consciousness which carries the whole process of creation in itself, and that all the seeming wastes and blunders of nature can be explained from some point of view at present beyond the reach of our minds. On the other hand, it may be that consciousness is now dawning in the universe for the first time. It may be that it is an accident, a fleeting product, like the morning mist on the mountaintop. On the other hand, it may be that it is destined to grow and expand and take control of the entire universe, as a farmer takes control of a field for his own purposes. It may be that just as our individual fragments of intelligence communicate and merge into a family, a club, a nation, a world culture, so we shall someday grope our way toward the consciousness of other planets, or of other states of being subsisting on this planet unknown to us, or perhaps even toward the cosmic soul, the universal consciousness which we call God. But meantime, all we can say with positiveness is this: man, the created, is becoming the creator. He is taking up the world purpose. He is imposing upon it new purposes of his own. He is attempting to impose upon it a moral code, to test it and discipline it by a new standard which he calls economy. To the present writer, this seems the most significant fact about life, the most fascinating point of view from which life can be regarded. The reader who wishes to follow it into greater detail is referred to a little book by Professor E. Ray Lankester, The Kingdom of Man, especially the opening essay with its fascinating title, Nature's Insurgent Son. In what ways have the reasoned and deliberate purposes of man revised and even supplanted the processes of nature? The ways are so many that it would be easier to mention those in which he has not done so. A modern civilized man is hardly content with anything that nature does, nor willing to accept any of nature's products. He will not eat nature's fruits, He prefers the kinds that he himself has brought into being. He is not content with the skin that nature has given him. He has made himself an infinite variety of complicated coverings. He objects to nature's habit of pouring cold water upon him, and so he has built himself houses in which he makes his own climate. He has recently taken to creating for himself houses which roll along the ground, or which fly through the air, or which swim under the surface of the sea. So he carries his private climate with him to all those places. It was nature's custom to remove her blunders and her experiments quickly from her sight. But man has decided that he loves life so well that he will preserve even the imbeciles, the lame, and the halt, and the blind. In a state of nature, if a man's eyes were not properly focused, he blundered into the lair of a tiger and was eaten. But civilized man despises such a method of maintaining the standard of human eyes. He creates for himself a transparent product, ground to such a curve that it corrects the focus of his eyes and makes them as good as any other eyes. In 10,000 such ways we might name, man has rebelled against the harshness of his ancient mother, and has freed himself from her control. But still he is the child of his mother, and so it is his way to act first, and then to realize what he has done. So it comes about that very few, even of the most highly educated men, are aware how completely the ancient ways of nature have been suppressed by her insurgent son. It is a good deal, as in the various trades and professions which have developed with such amazing rapidity in the modern civilization. The paper man knows how to make paper. The shoe man knows how to make shoes. The optician knows about grinding glasses. But none of these knows very much about the other's specialty, and has no realization of how far the other has gone. So it comes about that in our colleges we are still teaching ancient and immutable laws of nature, which in the actual practice of men at work are as extinct and forgotten as the dodo. In all colleges, except a few which have been tainted by socialist thought, the students are solemnly learning that the so-called Malthusian law, that population presses continuously upon the limits of subsistence. There are always a few more people in every part of the world than that part of the world is able to maintain. At any time we increase the world's productive powers, the population will increase correspondingly, so that there can never be an end to human misery. And abortion, war, and famine are simply nature's eternal methods of adjusting man to his environment. Thus solemnly we are taught in the colleges. And yet, 9 out of 10 of the students come from homes where the parents have discovered the modern practice of birth control. All the students are themselves finding out about it in one way or another, and will proceed when they marry to restrict themselves to 2 or 3 children. In vain will the ghost of their favorite statesman and hero, Theodore Roosevelt, be traveling up and down the land denouncing them for the dreadful crime of race suicide. That is to say, they're presuming to use their reason to put an end to the ghastly situation revealed by the Malthusian law. Overpopulation eternally recurring and checked by abortion, war, and famine. In vain will the ghost of their favorite saint and moralist, Anthony Comstock, be traveling up and down the land, putting people in jail for daring to teach to poor women what every rich woman knows, and for attempting to change the entirely man-made state of affairs whereby an intelligent and self-governing Anglo-Saxon land is being in 2 or 3 generations turned over to a slum population of Italians, Poles, Hungarians, Portuguese, French Canadians, Mexicans, and Japanese. Likewise, in every orthodox college, the student is taught what his professors are pleased to call the law of diminishing returns of agriculture. That is to say, additional labor expended upon a plot of land does not result in an equal increase of produce, and the increase grows less until finally you come to a time when no matter how much labor you expend, you can get no more produce from that plot of land. All professors teach this because 50 years ago it was true. And since that time it has not occurred to any professor of political science to visit a farm. And all the while, out in the suburbs of the city where the college is located, market gardeners are practicing on an enormous scale a new system of intensive agriculture which makes the law of diminishing returns a foolish joke. As Kropotkin shows in his book, Fields, Factories, and Workshops, the modern intensive gardener, by use of glass and the chemical test tube, has developed an entirely new science of plant raising. He is independent of climate, he makes his own climate, he is independent of the defects of the soil. He would just as soon start from nothing and make his soil upon an asphalt pavement. But doubling his capital investment, he raises not twice as much produce, but 10 times as much. If his methods were applied to the British Isles, he could raise sufficient produce on this small surface to feed the population of the entire globe. So we see that by simple and entirely harmless devices, man is in position to restrict or to increase population as he sees fit. Also, he is in position to raise food and produce the necessities of life for 100 or 1,000 times as many people as are now on the earth. But superstition ordains involuntary parenthood, and capitalism ordains that land shall be held out of use for speculation, or shall be exploited for rent. And this is done in the name of nature, that old nature of the tooth and claw, whose ancient plan it is that they shall take who have the power, and they shall keep who can. That ancient nature which has been so entirely suppressed and supplanted by civilized man, and which survives only as a ghost, a skeleton to be resurrected from the tomb, for the purpose of frightening the enslaved. When a predatory financier wishes a fur overcoat to protect himself from the cold, or when he hires a masseur to keep up the circulation of his blood, you do not find him troubling himself about the laws of nature. Never will he mention this old scarecrow, except when he is trying to persuade the workers of the world to go on paying him tribute for the use of the natural resources of the earth. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. Man, the Rebel, shows the transition stage between instinct and reason in which man finds himself, and how he can advance to a securer condition. In the state of nature, you find every creature living a precarious existence, incessantly beset by enemies, and the creature survives only so long as it keeps itself at the top of its form. The result is the maintenance of the type in its full perfection, and, under the competitive pressure, a gradual increase of its powers. Excepting when sudden eruptions of natural forces occur, every creature is perfectly provided with a set of instincts for all emergencies. It is in harmonious relationship to its environment. It knows how to do what it has to do, and even its fears and its pains serve for its protection. But now comes man and overthrows this state of nature, abolishes the competitive struggle, and changes at his own insolent will both his environment and his reaction thereto. Man's changes are, in the beginning, all along one line. They are for his own greater comfort, the avoidance of the inconveniences of nature and the stresses of the competitive struggle. In a state of nature, there are no fat animals. But in civilization, there are not merely fat animals, but fat men to eat the fat animals. In a state of nature, no animal loafs very long. It has to go out and hunt its food again. But man, by his superior cunning, compels the animals to work for him, and also his fellow men. So he produces unlimited wealth for himself. Not merely can he eat and drink and sleep all he wants, but he builds a whole elaborate set of laws and moral customs and religious codes about this power. He invents manners and customs and literatures and arts expressive of his superiority to nature and to his fellow men, and of his ability to enslave and exploit them. So he destroys for his imperious self the beneficent guardianship which nature had maintained over him. He develops 1,000 complicated diseases, 1,000 monstrous abnormalities of body and mind and spirit. And each one of these diseases and abnormalities is a new life of its own. It develops a body of knowledge, a science, and perhaps an art. It becomes the means of life, the environment, and the determining destiny of thousands, perhaps millions of human beings. So continues the growth of the colossal structure which we call civilization. In part still healthy and progressive, but in part as foul and deadly as a gigantic cancer. What is to be done about this cancer? First of all, it must be diagnosed, the extent of it precisely mapped out, and the causes of it determined. Man, the rebel, has rejected his mother nature and has lost and for the most part forgotten the instincts with which she provided him. He has destroyed the environment which, however harsh to the individual, was beneficent to the race, and has set up in the place of it a gigantic pleasure house, with talking machines and moving pictures and soda fountains and manicure parlors and gents furnishing establishments. Shall we say that man is to go back to a state of nature, that he shall no longer make asylums for the insane and homes for the defective, eyeglasses for the astigmatic, and malted milk for the dyspeptic? There are some who preach that. Among the multitudes of strange books and pamphlets which come in my mail, I found the other day a volume from England, Social Chaos and the Way Out, by Alfred Baker Reed, a learned and imposing tome of 364 pages, wherein, with all the paraphernalia of learning, it is gravely maintained that the solution for the ills of civilization is a return to the ancient Greek practice of infanticide. Every child at birth is to be examined by a committee of physicians, and if it is found to possess any defect, or if the census has established that there are enough babies in the world for the present, this baby shall be mercifully and painlessly asphyxiated. You might think that this is a joke, after the fashion of Swift's proposal for eating the children of famine-stricken Ireland. I have spent some time examining this book before I risk committing myself to the statement that it is the work of a sober scientist, with no idea whatever of fun. If we are going to think clearly on this subject, the first point we have to understand is that nature has nothing to do with it. We cannot appeal to nature, because we are many thousands of years beyond her sway. We left her when the first ape came down out of the treetop and fastened a sharp stone to the end of his club. We bade irrevocable goodbye to her when the first man kept himself from freezing and altered his diet by means of fire. Therefore, it is no argument to say that this, that, or the other remedy is unnatural. Our choice will lie among 1,000 different courses, but the one thing we may be sure of is that none of them will be natural. Bairnsfather, in one of his war cartoons, portrays a British officer on leave who got homesick for the trenches, and went out into the garden and dug himself a hole in the mud and sat shivering in the rain all night. And this amuses us vastly, but we should be even more amused if any kind of reformer, physician, moralist, clergyman, or legislator should suggest to us any remedy for our ills that was really according to nature. Civilized man, creature of art and of knowledge, has no love for nature except as an object for the play of his fancy and his wit. He means to live his own life, he means to hold himself above nature with all his powers. Yet, obviously, he cannot go on accumulating diseases. He cannot give his life blood to the making of a cancer while his own proper tissues starve. He must somehow divert the flow of his energies, his social bloodstream, so to speak, from the cancer to the healthy growth. To abandon the metaphor, man will determine by the use of his reason what he wishes life to be. He will choose the highest forms of it to which he can attain. He will then, by the deliberate act of his own will, devote his energies to those tasks. He will make for himself new laws, new moral codes, new customs, and ways of thought, calculated to bring to reality the ideal which he has formed. So only can man justify himself as a creator. So can he realize the benefit and escape the penalties of his revolt from his ancient mother. And then, perhaps, we shall make the discovery that we have come back to nature, only in a new form. Nature, harsh and cruel, wasteful and blind, as we call her, yet had her deep wisdom. She cared for the species. She protected and preserved the type. Man, in his new pride of power, has invented a philosophy which he dignifies by the name of individualism. He lives and works for himself. He chooses to wear silk shirts, and to break the speed limit, and to pin ribbons and crosses on his chest. Now, what he must do with his new morality, if he wishes to save himself from degeneration, is to manifest the wisdom and far vision of the old mother whom he spurned, and to say to himself deliberately, as an act of high daring, I will protect the species. I will preserve the type. I will deny myself the raptures of alcoholic intoxication, because it damages the health of my offspring. I will deny myself the amusement of sexual promiscuity, for the same reason. I will devise imitations of the chase and of battle in order that I may keep my physical body up to the best standard of nature, because I understand that all civilized life is based upon intelligence. I will acquire knowledge and spread it among my fellow men. Because I perceive that civilization is impossible without sympathy, and because sympathy makes it impossible for me to be happy while my fellow men are ignorant and degraded, therefore I dedicate my energies to the extermination of poverty, war, parasitism, and all forms of exploitation of man by his fellows. Professor William James is the author of an excellent essay entitled A Moral Equivalent for War. He sets forth the idea that men have loved war through the ages because it has called forth their highest efforts, has made them more fully aware of the powers of their being. He asks, may it not be possible for man, of his own free impulse, born of his love of life and the wonderful potentialities which it unfolds, to invent for himself a discipline, a code based not upon the destruction of other men and their enslavement, but upon cooperative emulation in the unfoldment of the powers of the mind? That this can be done by men, I have never doubted. That it will be done, and done quickly, has been made certain by the late world conflict, which has demonstrated to all thinking people that the progress of the mechanical arts has been such that man is now able to inflict upon his own civilization more damage than it is able to endure. End of chapter 6. End of section 3.